welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
I'm Craig.
A couple weeks ago, we saw an Italian horror film by Dario Argento called Deep Red. And so, after our really heady movie that we had last week, we thought we'd take a break and go for a little more popcorn this time, going with another notorious Italian film, Zombie 2, or at least that's what it's called in Italian. This one not by Argento, but by one of his peers, Lucio Fulci. Fulci, really, before he did this film, he did a lot of comedy, actually. He did probably 10, 12 or so comedy films. Really didn't get anywhere with them. Did a couple giallo-type pictures, and then ended up with this film in his lap. This film was intended as a sort of sequel of sorts, cashing in on the Dawn of the Dead.
Right.
Dawn of the Dead came out. This is a 1979 movie. I believe Dawn of the Dead was, what, 78, 77?
I don't remember.
And Dawn of the Dead was released in Italy under the title Zombie. And it was actually interesting because it was recut for the Italian market by Dario Argento.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he even rescored it using Goblin. You know what? That is a movie I would actually like to see. Like the Italian version of Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah.
And so this movie had actually already been written, but they decided to change the name to Zombie 2 to sort of cash in. There was really no law that said you couldn't do that in Italy at the time. And dropped this in Fulci's lap, and it became a very big hit. And it pretty much cemented the rest of Fulci's career as a straight-out horror director. So he got very well known, more for horror than giallo or any of his other pictures. And his take on it was to go really gross. He was very into the blood, the gore, really zooming in on it, even more than we saw like Argento the other day. So I like this film a lot. But it's not a perfect film.
No. No.
By any means. I mean, but there are just elements about it I like. You'd never seen this before, right, Craig?
No, I had kind of heard of it. You know, it's one of those kind of obscure titles that I've seen on lots of lists and things. But no, I had never seen anything. It's funny, you had told me maybe not to read too much about it because there were some surprising scenes, and I watching the movie, I knew what scene you were talking about, and we'll get there. It's really what makes this movie kind of stand out from your typical fare. But yeah, it's just kind of an old school zombie film. It's funny that it's not a direct sequel to Dawn of the Dead because it really easily could be. I mean, it's close enough. It's very much in keeping with like Night of the Living Dead. I mean, it's those same kind of slow walking zombies, pretty traditional in look, although I really liked the look of the zombies in this movie. They looked really decayed. Anymore with the modern zombie movies, they're always all wet and like bleeding and pussy. And these zombies, although it says at one point that they're like 400 years old, they look pretty good for being underground for 400 years, but they look like they've been underground. It's not all that oozy. I mean, you've got some blood and stuff, but for the most part, it's a lot of like caked dirt and caked blood and stuff. And
they're like dry and crusty.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and it looks good. And of course, this is the late 70s, so it's all practical effects. It's all makeup and costume, and it looks really good.
I think the makeup is part of what I love so much about this movie. Exactly what you just said. The zombies look like they've been underground for a while.
Right.
And it's almost surprising, actually, in a couple of the scenes when they do get shot or their heads get cut off or something, and all this red blood oozes out. It really betrays their exterior appearance in a way, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah, it does. I mean, I guess, what do we know about the anatomy of zombies? Probably not a whole lot.
That's true. Well, maybe after they eat your blood, it gets the blood circulating a little more inside.
Sure,
right?
Why not? Yeah, and another thing that I really liked about the look of them was they did a lot, and these must have been brave actors, or I guess maybe brave's not the right word, maybe they just had strong stomachs, but they did a lot with worms and maggots and stuff, and worms coming out of mouths and out of eyeballs, and it's obviously real. I mean, it's obviously practical effects. I don't know how much they were working with the actual actors or how much of it was dummies. I don't know, but it looked good.
It does, yeah. If you were to draw a picture of what a zombie should look like, these are the zombies, aren't they?
Absolutely. I think so.
It's pretty awesome. I like that about this movie. You know what else I like about this movie is it's kind of a return to the original zombie lore. Instead of being radiation or some weird medical thing, it's voodoo.
Yeah.
It's...
Well, that's the only explanation provided. I mean,
That's true.
it's most of it. The movie opens with a scene that appears to be in some kind of tropical locale. It's like kind of a makeshift hospital or something, and you see a corpse, all tied up in a sheet, and it starts to sit up. Somebody who we don't know yet shoots it and says, "Okay, the boat can return now." And then it cuts to New York, and we're in New York for just a little while, and there's this sailboat, right off of Manhattan, which was also just kind of a weird flashback to see Manhattan in those days. It's still a little bit eerie to see the Twin Towers there. But this apparently abandoned boat, and they call, the Coast Guard goes in looking for it, and the boat appears to be abandoned until the cops are looking around, and a zombie pops out and kills one of the cops, and that's what kind of sets it into motion. They're investigating this boat, and it turns out this boat belonged to some guy, and his daughter Anne hasn't heard from him in a long time. She knew he was going to be traveling, but she hadn't heard from him in a long time.
Good thing she happened to live in New York.
Right, exactly. And I don't know how the boat ended up there, really.
Yeah.
It kind of, I don't...
Well, aren't we talking down in the Caribbean, what is about where it came from?
Well, see, I never really could tell.
There was something, San Miguel was something that they had said, and then there was, later on, we came across a cemetery of some conquistadores.
Yeah.
It was maybe to be the Gulf there, which is one of the places one of the many places where the film kind of falls apart, in that how would this sailboat sailed itself out of the Gulf and drifted all the way up to New York?
Right.
You'd expect it to hit Florida or Georgia or some other place.
Yeah. I mean, I guess just the crew or whatever was slowly zombified. Like, maybe they only became zombies when they got close to New York or something.
Be. They were sailing around and up,
right. And what I was trying, I'm trying to get through the first part quickly, because it really just introduces the characters in New York. You've got the daughter Susan, and then you've got a reporter Peter who's assigned to this story, and they do some investigating around, and they find this letter that the guy who owned the boat had written to his daughter Anne.
To my daughter Anne, in case anything should happen to me. Due to my morbid curiosity, I have managed to contract a strange disease. They're taking care of me as if I was some sort of guinea pig, but I know I'll never leave this island again, at least not alive. I haven't been a good father, but I have always loved you. One last kiss from Dad, Matul, and it's dated 15th September.
From that, they know where he had been.
Yeah.
This island, wherever it is, called Matul.
Yeah. one thing we would never forget.
We'd never forget, because they keep saying it over and over again, and it's just funny it's like, how many times can you say, "Welcome to Matul"? How do you like Matul?
I came to this island from Matul many years ago.
So Peter and Susan find out where it is, and then so they go there, and that's where we spend pretty much the rest of the movie. It's this tropical locale. They're looking for this tropical island, and that's, the bulk of the film takes place wherever on Matul. The mystical island of Matul. Right?
But don't forget the scene because this is important later, when they do pull in the cop who was killed as a zombie. There is a scene of them doing an autopsy on him, which is rather humorous.
It's a really funny scene.
Because I guess the head, not mortician, what do you call him?
Autopsy guy? I don't know.
Autopsy guy. The head autopsy guy. And his, assistant, I guess, who's maybe still training. And
something.
Keeps putting him down.
And it's pretty hilarious, because it's kind of this nerdy, snooty white guy, and he's just the other guy is black, and he's just totally demeaning to him.
What's your opinion of what happened? Oh, can't you see there are bite marks here?
You idiot.
Hand me a scalpel.
Right. And that's the cop that got attacked and killed. But we also see at the end of that autopsy scene that underneath the sheet he starts to move, and that is important for the end of the film.
It is. It's an interesting addition. My understanding is that the New York scenes were added to the script after the success of Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, I read that too. And it makes sense, because it really does kind of tie the movie to Dawn of the Dead. I mean, they could be arguably happening concurrently. What goes on the island with our main characters, we don't find this out until the end of the movie, but when they finally, a couple of them, when the remaining survivors escape the island, they listen to a radio broadcast, and the radio broadcast is talking about the infestation of zombies in New York, and the last scene cuts to zombies walking across the Brooklyn Bridge in a scene that's very reminiscent of Dawn of the Dead or any of the other films from that series. So, I mean, It may have been a cheap cash grab to try to kind of pawn this off as a sequel, but they really did a good job of it.
Yeah.
I mean, they certainly did a better job of it than the Italian filmmakers behind Troll 2. I mean, there is no connection between those two movies. At least there is some effort here to tie them together.
That's right. There's a little more artistry in this film.
A little bit.
And I did think there was quite a bit of artistry in this film. You know, Fulci did a really good job of finding really interesting camera angles, I thought, and moving the camera around quite a bit. He liked to do that trick where you're looking in a mirror, but you don't realize you're looking in a mirror, and then it pans out into the real, which is a little disorienting. And I don't know, I felt like we were looking through the eyes of a pretty accomplished filmmaker who is taking some care with what's otherwise pretty exploitive, low-budget fare.
Right, yeah. I mean, I thought that the cinematography looked good, too, and at one point while we were watching it, I asked you if this was like a restored version or something, because it's the version that we're watching is really clean. I mean, the video is really clean. When they're out on the ocean, you get some kind of broad shots, and, when they're in the tropical locale, he paints good pictures. Like you said, atypical of low budget type stuff.
Yeah. So Anne and Peter decide to commandeer a boat to take them down to this island of Matul, and they run across two folks, Susan and Brian, I believe. And this was, I guess they flew out. They must have flown out to the Gulf somewhere, to some other island, some well-known island. I think it was San Miguel. I saw it on a sign or something, or maybe it was just...
Spanish-speaking island.
Yeah, and this guy says, "Oh, go down here. I know there's a couple who have a boat, and they're gonna head out." And they meet these two, Susan and Brian, and they're on vacation. They're planning to go to another island, and they reluctantly decide to take them aboard.
It's not a cool place to hit. The natives claim it's cursed. They avoid it like the plague.
Well, we have to go there all the same.
And you want a ride from us?
If that's possible.
And experience with boats?
Uh-huh.
And the lady?
I was born on a boat.
Okay, Peter. We'll have to load more supplies. You pay your share. Deal?
A deal.
Step on board. Here. Look, I'll warn you right now. Don't expect us to come sightseeing once we get there. I've found it never pays to ignore native superstitions.
He maybe should have followed that instinct.
That's kind of a general horror movie rule. Right. You should just, any superstition of the natives, don't
respect
laugh at it. Yeah. So they go out, and of course they're driving. They're driving. Yeah, right. They're floating around looking for Matul, and they mention that, well, it's not really on any maps. A lot of these islands aren't really on the maps.
Uncharted, right?
He kind of supposedly knows where it is, but they're not for sure. And while they're out looking, Susan says, "Hey, let's stop here. I want to go down and get some pictures." She's an underwater photographer or something. And so she strips down to no wetsuit or anything.
Right. You get a nice long scene of Susan taking her clothes off.
She does.
And putting her scuba thing on over her naked body. I mean, she's wearing this tiny little bathing suit thong bottom, and that's it. And there's like even a pretty long shot of her like strapping up under her private area. I mean, it's clearly exploitive, but that was really typical of 70s horror.
Yeah.
You had to have some boobies in 70s horror.
It's kind of nice to see something different from a shower scene,
True.
You're going for the scuba diving scene.
We got a shower scene, too,
We
folks.
did. Oh, yeah.
Don't worry.
That's in here as well. She goes diving, and again, the cinematography is really quite nice.
I was impressed as soon as she fell over and it changed from perspective from above to below water. I thought, wow, they were kind of going for it here.
And it's just beautiful under there with all of the fish and the coral, and she's swimming and she's taking pictures. And then there's a shark that comes by, pretty decent sized shark.
Yeah.
That appears to be threatening her, or at least she's ducking away from it. And as she ducks into sort of a nook in the coral, a hand comes out. And we get the underwater zombie.
The underwater zombie, which I have never seen before or since, I don't think.
Oh, man, it's so awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. And this is the scene that you were, I think that you were, it is, right?
It is, it's one of them, yeah.
So she came up to the surface and screamed for help, and then the shark was coming towards her. She goes back down, and like you said, from around this piece of coral or whatever, this zombie grabs her, and they struggle for a while, and she eventually is able to break free and swims back to the surface, and then you have the awesome zombie shark battle.
Yes! Zombie shark fight.
It's awesome. And, like, this is a real shark.
It's clearly a real shark.
Yeah, it's obviously a real shark. And I read that initially they had cast and hired an actor to play this role, but for some reason, I don't know if he got sick.
He got sick,
yeah.
I think it was, yeah.
He got sick and he was unable to do it, and so they replaced him with the shark trainer. First of all, I didn't know there was such a thing as shark trainers.
Yeah.
I didn't know you could train sharks. Secondly, why wouldn't you have the shark trainer do it from the beginning?
Right? How in the world?
You know, maybe the scene would have played out differently if the actor had done it. I mean, this scene is really cool because the guy, the shark trainer, Zombie, and the shark are really, they're interacting physically. I mean, he's
latched onto him, and he's kind of grabbing him, and he's trying to bite at his skin. He gets a bite off of the shark at one point, and then the shark comes around and, like, gets a bite of his arm, and tears his arm off. Yeah, it's interesting because, well, the guy's name, I looked it up, is Ramon Bravo. Now, if you're going to be a shark trainer,
yeah, absolutely,
Ramon Bravo is the name to have. And apparently he's kind of a shark guy. Like, the other movies he's been in were documentaries about sharks, or other movies that featured killer sharks or something. So I guess he knows what he's doing.
He clearly knew what he was doing. I mean, he had to have. I mean, that had to be high risk. He had to have, had pretty extensive experience with sharks to be able to do that. Now, to be fair, we've seen video of real shark attacks, and they're pretty frenzied. I mean, this was, he was obviously taking care and not trying to hurt this animal. And, but it was well choreographed and just so different. I've never seen that kind of interaction with the shark in a fictional movie. Like, documentaries are one thing, but from an actor's perspective, and I was impressed. Plus, just freaking cool. Zombies versus sharks. I mean, I'm surprised sci-fi hasn't rolled out a whole movie series of those yet.
I know. Well, I'd like to know what the conversation was like when they're reading the script and going, I see you wrote in a zombie shark battle. And, all right, cool, we'll do that.
We'll give it a go.
It was good. It was good. And I mean, an underwater zombie, the whole thing is just fantastic. And you can almost turn the movie off right there and just be totally satisfied with it. Because if Fulci does anything right, he delivers where it counts.
Yeah. And I mean, it's worth seeing the movie just for that. Now, like I said, really, overall, it's fairly typical fare for zombie films. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy it. I mean, if you're a fan of zombie films, this is old school, and if you like that old school stuff, watch this. I mean, it's good. I wasn't expecting very much.
Yeah.
Zombie films in general tend to follow the same kind of tropes, and it's kind of, you've seen one, you've seen them all. That's not to say I don't still watch them, but
you have to really go out there to find one with an interesting enough twist that makes it stand out and be unique.
Yeah, and the shark scene is that for this. I mean, that's about it as far as unique stuff goes. But as an old school zombie movie, it's a good one.
Yeah, and from this point on, it does get a little boring, I think. It doesn't move very fast, right?
It's got kind of a slow build throughout. I was noticing that. I mean, you've got that initial zombie attack in New York, and then you see the zombie kind of start to come alive. But then it's really a half an hour. In an hour and a half film, it's a half an hour before they get to the island. And then even when they get to the island, it starts off pretty slow. I mean, you get some zombie shots, but it's individual zombies. People are scared of them, but it doesn't seem to really be all that much of a threat yet.
Yeah.
And it's not really until the final act that things really pick up.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not an action-packed thing.
No.
In many ways, it is kind of like the Giallo pick we watched the other day, where it's a lot of like walking around, investigating, talking, and things, and then something sudden happens, and when it does, it's pretty intense and brutal.
Right.
Their boat, I guess the shark hits their boat and damages it, so they're forced to land in the island, and thankfully, there is an island right there, and it happens to be Matul, right? Matul, yes. I forgot it already. It happens to be Matul, and we're introduced to Dr. David Maynard, and a woman, I guess, is his wife. We don't really know. I don't think we ever got her name.
No, we don't. But he does say my wife, so it was his wife.
Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm. And she's pretty freaked out, and we don't really know exactly why. But
freaked out and pissed off.
Yeah.
I'll be at the hospital.
Hospital.
You still see yourself as the scientist you once were, don't you? Well, you're not. You're no better than one of their witch doctors.
Just stop it! My research is...
Research? You call fooling around with superstitions and voodoo rites research?
You know perfectly well that the work I'm doing is very important, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't.
I don't give a damn! I don't want to stay on this island one more hour. You won't be happy until I meet one of your zombies.
And then he leaves and leaves her home alone. They've got this really nice pad on the island. He leaves her there and he tells the groundskeeper, keep an eye out, don't let anybody onto the property or whatever. And
the
then
most
he leaves.
worthless groundskeeper ever.
Right. The groundskeeper's like, oh, si, senor, no one will come here. And then and then a little bit more happens, but then when we come back to the house, the groundskeeper's like sitting on the porch and he hears a noise and he's up and out of there. Like, oh, never mind, see you later.
He sure is. And that's when we get the shower scene.
The shower scene.
And, of course, long, lingering shower scene, and a hand ominously... Again, a really nice moment, I thought, where the hand ominously comes up into frame on the window.
It was kind of genuinely spooky. You knew it was coming, because you... every once in a while, it's not often, but every once in a while they'll do POV shots from the point of view of the zombies. And this was one of them. So you kind of see, it's kind of like a peeping Tom perspective. You see you're watching her shower from outside this window, and then very slowly from the bottom of the frame comes this zombie hand, and it's spooky.
It is. I like that moment. And then we get to the scene the other scene that I thought is pretty notorious from this film, and that is when the zombie comes in towards her. She ends up holding herself into a closet, essentially, or some other room, and it's one of those doors that has wooden slats across it. So she is trying to push something up against the door. In the meanwhile, on the other side, the zombie's breaking through the slats, and they're poking out sharply at her. And one of them grabs her hair and slowly pulls it towards her. She's sort of helpless against it, and slowly pulls her eye onto a nice, sharp splinter of wood jutting out. And it's pretty gruesome.
It is gross
and intense. And like we were saying the other week, I think it was even last week, dealing with the eyes and the mouth and stuff. It's kind of gross. Snaps it off in her head.
Yeah, I liked that shot too. But this would be one of my criticisms of the movie. Now it's a zombie movie, so you learn to just let things go. But there was so much irrational behavior from the characters, and there always is in horror. But times when the zombies are approaching, and again, these are slow-walking zombies, and the living characters will just stand there frozen in horror, just waiting for these super slow zombies to approach and get them, which they usually do. And this scene, it was a great visual. I know exactly why they did it. They wanted this effect. But it didn't make any sense.
No, it absolutely didn't.
She's trying to keep this zombie out. First she's kind of leaning against the door. The zombie has his fingers in the door, and she finally gets it shut, and the fingers fall off. And then, like you said, it starts coming through the slats. And so what she does is she goes to this dresser, which is below waist level, and she starts pushing it up against the door. Mm-hmm. Now, the zombie's obviously coming through the top part of the door.
It's not going to help her.
No, I don't know what she thinks is going to help. And then when the zombie... And then she gets it up against there, and then she just stands there right against the door where the zombie's on the other side. So when it busts through, it's able to grab her hair, and it slowly pulls her eyeball onto this broken stick. Never once does she attempt to do anything with her hands.
Yeah. Yeah, she's not knocking his arm away.
No, not knocking the spike thing away. Mm-hmm. And, I get it. They wanted the effect. It was a good effect. It was a good zombie kill, so you let it go. But several times throughout, that was the case. People would meet their demise because they would just stand there, not defending themselves in any way.
And I think a lot of that has to do with, I think Fulci is way more interested in the slow gross out.
Yeah.
He could have yanked her eye right onto that. It would have been pretty intense and whatnot, but he wanted us to see that. There's even a POV shot as though that spike is coming towards us. Yeah. And you're right. It's super artificial. It makes for great visuals, but it doesn't make a lot of sense.
And it is super gross. The splinter punctures her eye, and pops and like all this
liquids
fluid
oozing
comes out. It's a good effect.
Meanwhile, the rest of the crew is out talking to Dr. David Maynard, and they're learning about what's happening. And essentially, I guess people are coming down with some mysterious illness on the island, but then after they die, shortly thereafter they wake up as zombies. And so he has been systematically shooting people in the head after they die. And they have a mass grave that they've been burying outside, which is kind of a shocking scene, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's got this set up in an old church that's serving as a makeshift hospital. He's trying to treat these people with transfusions. They don't go much into what he's trying to do.
No.
There's one scene where he draws his own blood and puts it on a microscope and looks at it, but we don't know what he's looking at or for. He's trying to give transfusions to the people who are infected, but we just know that. We don't know what the purpose is or what the intended result is, but he's failing. Nothing's working. And not only is it people getting sick and reanimated, but also then when zombies kill somebody, then they're immediately infected and immediately come back too. And the natives... Well, this was kind of confusing to me. Like, the natives thought that it was the result of voodoo that was causing this, but then they were also trying to perform voodoo to make it stop?
It was an odd thing, and it's never explained in the film. He is continually asking, I think his name is Lucas, his... sort of his native assistant. Mm-hmm. And it seems like there's a village on the other side of the island as well, because they talk about that village being kind of overrun, and then when it turns out a zombie is spotted in their village, he starts to freak out and wants them to check on his wife and stuff. But it seems, and this is just my idea, would be that if people are dying, they're performing these voodoo rites to prevent the illness or to make them well, but those rites are having the unintended or somewhat side effect of bringing them back to life. That was my only guess. And the only thing that would have made this movie a little bit better in my eyes is if that were a lot clearer. And if we even saw some scenes of the voodoo rites, or we had some idea of the purpose behind it. But as it is, all we hear are drums.
Right. We never even really see the natives except for the couple of native characters, and there's only a couple. I mean, I don't know where they filmed this, but it seemed pretty deserted. It seemed like they kind of had a little desert, and it could have been staged. I don't know. But this little deserted village, and they keep talking about the natives, and the natives are converging in the center of the island to do these rituals, but we never see them, and we never see that. We hear drum beats, we hear like tribal wailing and stuff like that, but we never see it. I think if they remade this movie, they would probably play that up a lot more.
Yeah.
And it would be interesting if they did, because doesn't the whole lore of zombies, it comes from voodoo tradition, right?
It does, yeah.
There are people who still practice voodoo today.
Oh, yeah.
And, I've read stories. I can't account for the truthfulness of them, but their culture believes in zombies and reanimation. If I remember what I've read correctly, the zombies in the voodoo tradition are not actually dead. They're just taken over by somebody else.
It's kind of a mixture of drugs and belief. And it's a true thing. I mean, did you ever see The Serpent in the Rainbow?
I did. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that tells a pretty good story, another Wes Craven film, of generally what it happens, and that is that there is a kind of drug through this ritual that people are given, and it's a psychotropic type drug, but that commingles with the actual person's belief in the effect of the voodoo, turning them to a zombie. And what ends up happening is these people will go into sort of a suspended animation. The drug will induce a state where their heartbeat is so slow that it's and low that it's undetectable, and so they'll get buried. And then the person who did that to them will then, that night go back, take them out, and then that person becomes sort of their slave, essentially.
Yeah.
It's weird to think that it actually happens, but apparently it's because of that person. It's just a psychological thing. They believe they're a zombie now because they believe in the magic. They've been pulled out of the ground and they're with this guy, so that's how they act.
That's wild.
It's crazy ridiculous. Now, this movie's nothing like that, of course.
But at least it kind of tries to connect to the lore, I guess, a little bit. It doesn't explore it very much, and that's, when I read about this, it was always just intended, I think that some of the titles that were thrown around were like Island of the Zombies or something like that. It was just intended to be zombies on an island movie, and that's what it is.
And I think The Island of Dr. Moreau, that story was an inspiration Freeman for the screenwriter
really?
of this, actually. Yeah,
it's funny because I was kind of thinking that it felt like, minus all the weird animal stuff, but because of the tropical location and because of the scientists like experimenting with life and death and those types of things, as we were watching it, I was thinking in my head, it feels like a cross between Night of the Living Dead and the Island of Dr. Moreau.
Except we never get to see the evil doctor, really, you know?
Well, right, yeah. I mean, they talk about this witch doctor. The doctor I was talking about is our main guy. They do talk about how there's like this witch doctor, but we never... I mean, he's just casually mentioned.
Yeah, we never see him at all, much like the other natives. At the behest of the Dr. Maynard, the rest of them drive down the way to check on his wife.
Peter, Ann, Susan, and Brian.
That's right. And they find her in a pretty... Actually, that's a pretty gross, cool scene as well, where half of her body is gone, but she's still laying there, and there are 4 or 5 zombies munching on her. Mm-hmm. It actually made me think of... I don't know if you've ever played Resident Evil, the game. When I was in college, we used to play Resident Evil, and this was the kind of scene that you would see in Resident Evil, where you would turn the corner, and suddenly in front of you is a half-eaten corpse and 4 or 5 zombies just slowly munching on her, kind of really into eating. Let's put it that way. They don't really notice you until you get up close to them.
And that's another one of those moments where all 4 of them come around the corner and see this happening. 4 or 5 undead zombies eating the gruesome remains of this corpse, and they just stand there and watch for a little while.
That's right. And they back out, and there are 2 more zombies in the hallway, and they sort of slowly are stumbling towards them, so slowly, in fact, that they could have easily just knocked them out of the way and
just slipped by.
Yeah, you're right. But they pull some stuff off the wall and hit them and run off. And, of course, they're driving their car down the road to try to get away and back to the doctor in the hospital. And they hit a zombie in the middle of the road. It goes off the road, and now their car's broken down.
Right. It's a funny scene because this zombie walks out in front of the Jeep. Brian is driving, and he hits the zombie, and it flies off to the other side of the road. And it makes no sense why they crash. Like, they hit the zombie flies off, it seems like everything's fine, and then, and they
turns to the left.
He veers to the left, and they go off, and it's the slowest crash scene ever. Like, they're just kind of slowly tooling through this forest until finally they kind of bump the bumper into a tree, and Peter in the back seat kind of like flails, like, and apparently his ankle gets injured. I don't know how that could have possibly happened.
Maybe get caught under the seat or something.
I guess
they weren't wearing seatbelts. That was the problem.
That's the problem. So then they have to walk,
and that gives them a good excuse to walk a little slowly.
Right,
maybe a little too slowly at times.
Which makes sense because if they could run, they could get out of there super easy.
That'd be no problem.
No problem.
So they're going along, and Peter asked to stop for a moment because his ankle is sore. And so they sit down. Susan and Brian say, well, we're going to go on a little up ahead and check things out. And like you mentioned, they go about 6 feet.
Yeah.
Like around the corner?
Not even. They walk. I mean, they've got to still be within sight line. I mean,
they totally are. You can see through a tree, and there's the other couple. But they stop there, and he kicks something on the ground and picks it up, and it turns out to be a conquistador helmet. And they look around, and there's some graves conveniently. They're right there, and he surmises, well, we must be on an old graveyard of the conquistadors. And meanwhile, 6 feet in the other direction, and this was a hilarious scene, I thought, Peter and Anne, which, again, maybe looked a lot better on paper than it played out in real life.
I'm sorry I dragged you into all this.
It's my father we came looking for, isn't it?
You know, when we get back to New York...
You don't have to say anything now. It's just... I'm so scared we're not going to make it off this island.
He just turns over on top of her and they start making out.
In the most awkward kiss ever. Did you see that? It's like, it's one of those things where somebody who's never, like a 13-year-old boy who's never kissed a girl before, Like, he opens his mouth wide like he's going to try to eat her face and just, like, plants it over the top of her mouth. It was hilarious. Not sexy at all.
No. And it really came out of nowhere. I don't think you ever really got the sense that the two of them were romantically interested. There just was no time, really, with the two of them. There's too much going on and too much that they're doing.
Right. They meet early on in the movie, and then they're instantly like a couple.
Yeah.
There's no development there at all.
But it's a cool moment, though, I still think. Yeah. And this is, again, another thing you don't see in enough modern zombie movies, is the zombies actually coming out of the grave.
Right.
Right? And so there's all this crusty awesomeness of these hands that look really made up, that are coming out of the dirt, and they grab her hair, and another hand comes up and grabs his ankle. And then we cut away from them to the other two. Again, 6 feet away. Mm-hmm. And... there's kind of a scream, and so Brian jumps up and walks over, and the girl, Susan, just sits there, suddenly terrified because she hears things happening around her. Doesn't make any motion to move, doesn't follow him, which didn't make a lot of sense to me.
No.
Slowly watches this zombie rise. It must take a full 2 minutes for this zombie.
Gosh, yeah.
And it's an awesome scene. If you see the jacket cover of when I was a kid, this is a movie I always wanted to see, and I never rented. Was that crusty zombie with the worms coming out of his eyes and the snaggly teeth, and he's slowly coming up out of the ground, and then he slowly stands, and she's just standing there staring at it.
Yeah.
And then he just plops forward onto her, and...
bites a big chunk of her neck out.
Yeah, there goes the jugular.
Right, which we get several of those shots, and that bright red blood that was so popular at the time. And there were some instances in this movie where I actually thought the blood looked real, but this was not one of them.
It's like red paint.
Yeah, but I mean, it's very bright and colorful, and
it's really gushing out of there too.
Yeah. Again, like you said, I mean, she just sits there. She doesn't scream. She doesn't... I guess what we're supposed to believe is that she's so terrified that she's just completely frozen. But again, I mean, like you said, it takes a good minute and a half for this zombie to... I mean, it starts with his hand coming out, and then he slowly comes all the way out and stands up, and meanwhile she's there the whole time.
Yeah, Fulci is definitely way more interested in the visuals that he is invoking.
Realism.
Rather than any sense of realism whatsoever. And the other three pop back over and see this. We really don't see how they got out of their scrape.
No.
We don't hear a gunshot or anything like that, but they're almost like nothing happened. They come back over and discover her. Of course, Brian is beside himself, but they all say, hey, we need to keep moving. There's nothing you can do for her. So they continue on, and they eventually make it back to the hospital.
Yeah, they walk out of frame, and you see, as soon as they walk out of frame, you see the other zombies in the cemetery starting to rise.
Oh, that's right.
It's really slow, but it's cool. I mean, it's
that big moment.
Yeah, it's right. And this is really when the last act kicks in, and the action kind of picks up. And it was very reminiscent, to me. The style is very different, but very reminiscent of Thriller.
Yes, exactly what I was going to say.
When everybody's rising out of their graves. Again, you have to totally suspend your disbelief because these people were buried under a centimeter of dirt.
That's right.
like they literally just kind of do a sit-up and they're out of their grave. But it is a cool scene. I mean, you see there's kind of in the center of the frame, there's one coming out, and then from further back in the frame, you see one coming out of the forest, and then another one pops up in front of the frame. It's really neat layering, and you get to see, that now there's going to be a multitude. There's going to be a zombie horde, and there is from that point on. They keep they're trying to get back to the hospital on foot. And they keep obviously they're going slow. Again, at one point, the guy with the broken ankle says, I have to stop. And so they stop, and you see the zombies kind of coming out of the trees behind them, but super slowly. And they're like, well, no, we have to go. But it's so easy to outrun them. I mean, it's so reminiscent of Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
These slow walking zombies.
The Walking Dead zombies go much, much faster than this.
Right. Yeah. And then you talk about, like 28 days later, 28 weeks later.
When they're tearing across.
Right. No, This is the old school, slow walking zombie. So they do get back to the hospital.
And the doctor's there. He's just covered the eyes of another victim, basically, and and they bang on the door to let them in, and they get in, and so they barricade the door, and they're inside deciding how they're going to defend themselves. One guy is running around. It's Brian. He's running around closing all of the windows. Zombies are starting to come in the windows, but he's hitting them with stuff and knocking them in. They go in the back and start to fill up Molotov cocktails with kerosene. It's interesting because I don't know if they were planning on burning the barn down around them or if they were thinking they were going to chuck them outside, but the zombies got to them first. It was an odd choice of weapon when you're stuck inside a wooden building.
I was thinking that too. I was like, man, I hope there's a back door. Because the zombies, and somehow a few individual zombies have gotten in, and they...
Well, I think it's the dead corpses inside there had come to life, which... Yeah.
Yeah, this bothered me, though, because every time that we've seen the corpses in there up to this point, they've all been shot in the head. I mean, he's been shooting all these corpses in the head. He knows they're going to come back to life, but then all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe he didn't shoot a few of them in the head because they start waking up.
Like right now when he really needs to be doing his due diligence, suddenly he's forgotten.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's a few of them inside, and there's a few little individual battles, and the doctor gets attacked and killed. His native assistant
Lucas gets killed. The one girl, Susan, gets killed. No, well, there's another unbelievable scene where Susan just stands there frozen. I'm sorry, not Susan.
Not Susan, right, Anne.
Anne.
Susan's already dead. She died back in the forest. But right, Anne is confronted by a zombie, and she just stands there, like, waiting for somebody to help her, which somebody does. One of the guys shoots the zombie.
The doctor is a female assistant we didn't even bring up, and she's
hardly even worth mentioning. It's so funny. Because she reminded me, like, of an extra in a soap opera or a porno. Like, she's just there to, like, hand people things and say, thank you, doctor.
She reminded me of Mary Ann in Gilligan's Island.
Yeah.
She had that same look, but nobody's really that interested in her.
No, she's totally insignificant, really. She gets killed, doesn't she?
She does get killed at some point. I'm trying to remember how or what or when.
I don't remember.
But
Zombie gets her.
It's Lucas, I think, the dead Lucas who comes over and kills her.
Right.
There's some great effects in there, though. I mean, when Lucas gets his arm bitten out, there is just a nice chunk taken out of his arm, and it is disgusting.
Yeah.
They're bashing the zombies over the head as they're coming in. I mean, this is what I mean when I say Fulci delivers. He delivers where it counts, and that is if you came here wanting to see a bunch of blood and gore and zombies getting beat up and cool-looking zombies getting beat up, you've come to the right place.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, this is the point at which it all comes to a head. All this stuff happens. They end up... And more walking zombies on fire...
Yeah.
One's arm burns off.
Yeah, they're throwing these, homemade kerosene bombs, and it's not really slowing the zombies down, but the building kind of starts to come down on top of the zombies. And gosh, I don't even remember. They get out somehow.
It's like you said, they slip out the back door.
Yeah, slip out the back door. Let's get to the boat.
And then Brian comes across Susan, undead,
reanimated.
And another one of those ridiculous moments where he just stands there and stares at her. And they're all like, shoot her, shoot her, shoot her. And she just walks right up and takes a chunk out of his arm. Then suddenly he's up against the tree going, all right, shoot her, shoot her.
And they do.
But it's a way to get it down to basically 3 people. We know Brian is mortally wounded.
Of course.
So they make it to the boat. And... Again, I thought the boat was
sinking.
The whole reason they're on the island
is because they needed to repair the boat because the shark cracked it. But I guess it's all right.
I don't know. Maybe some of the natives went and helped repair it, but it's only been this is day 2, right, of the whole ordeal.
Yeah.
I think not even 24 hours have passed, really.
Yeah, they've been there one night.
Yeah. So anyway, their boat, I guess, is working again, and so they sail off. But David says, don't let me become one of them.
Yeah, get me home, save me.
So instead, when he starts to pass out and he's obviously dead, instead of shooting him in the head...
Or throwing him overboard.
Yeah, they just lock him downstairs and...
What do we do now?
Lock him in the bilge, take him back with us to the States. Someone there might be able to do something.
But we can't risk it. You know what he might turn into.
And I'll make sure that he's safe. We've got to take him back with us. He's the only proof we've got that this all happened. And we will need proof, unfortunately. Otherwise, they'll just think that we're crazy.
I don't care. I feel dead myself.
But then that's immediately when they say, let's try to find something cheery on the radio.
That's right.
And they turn on. So Peter takes him down and locks him in the hold or something. And they come up and they're listening to the radio. And that's where they get the report from New York that New York has been or is being taken over by zombies. And they just kind of look at each other like, oh no. And then from downstairs in the boat, we hear Brian, who is now a zombie, kind of banging on the door. And then it cuts to New York City, the Brooklyn Bridge, and we just see tons and tons of zombies walking along the walkways of the Brooklyn Bridge. Meanwhile, traffic is flowing as normal, which I thought was kind of funny. But I looked it up, and it said it was just budgetary. They couldn't afford to shut down the bridge. So... and that's it, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's the end. It's a bleak ending, which is very in keeping with all the Night of the Living Dead movies.
Oh, yeah.
So that was good.
Right. And like I said, I really felt like it really kind of tied it to that series. It felt like, maybe it felt more like a cousin than a brother or sister,
Yeah.
But if you wanted to try to put it into a continuum, you could imagine that what was happening with them on the island was happening concurrently with an outbreak in the States, too. So
Yeah.
I thought the connection was fine.
Yeah. I felt like this movie, if it had been an hour long instead of an hour and a half, if you had cut out a lot of the plotting along, a lot of the explanation that was unsatisfying anyway, because you never really got a total explanation. And it's not like you have to have an explanation, but when the whole movie seems to be about figuring it out,
Right.
and they talk about it so much, and the doctor's investigating, and they're talking about the voodoo, you expect a little bit of resolution, in that regard, or at least some better hints than we ended up getting.
Yeah.
I mean, the Night of the Living Dead movies make a real big point of not really giving you an explanation.
Right.
There's like radiation or something, and that's about it.
Well, in the first one, there's really no explanation for it. Like the original George Romero, there's really no explanation.
You're right.
Is there?
I guess you're right. The radiation's just a theory, isn't it?
I guess. It's been so long. I mean, I've seen that one several times. I've seen the remake with Tony Todd, and I've seen a lot of the sequels, but I don't remember that well.
Yeah, you're right. I think it was a theory. At some point, it seems like Romero's making some allusions or trying to say something about, the atomic age or atomic weapons. But yeah, there's never a really solid explanation, and the movie's not concerned with giving you that.
Right.
This movie, unfortunately, seems to be somewhat concerned with giving you that, but it doesn't.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, just take that stuff out and give us more shark versus zombie battles.
Maybe give us the voodoo priest. That's something I would have liked to have seen. But generally speaking, I liked it, and frankly, I didn't expect to.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't.
Really? Why not?
I don't know. Well, first of all, the zombie niche of the genre is really not my favorite. I'll watch them, but. Especially I'm not a Walking Dead fan. I hear that's great. I hear the quality's great, the storytelling's great, but it just seems like the more contemporary ones that I've seen, it's just, get tons of zombies and gross out. It's not, there's not much more to it than that. It's not to say I won't watch them. It's not to say that I don't appreciate it, but I actually liked this movie more than I have liked some of the more modern versions, because I feel like, I don't know if it was paying homage to George Romero, but it felt very much a part of that universe, and I prefer those older ones to the newer ones. And so I liked this.
Well, it's more atmospheric. And again, I think having it on a tropical island, it's a little exotic. The zombies themselves are crusty and old. They actually feel like they've come out of the ground. And they're the slow and plodding zombies that you'd imagine, dead people being. It all works in that world, like you mentioned, is an appealing one to be in, maybe more so than the 28 Days Later running, freaking out zombie.
Well, and see, I maybe you've seen it. I don't know. It was one of the Romero sequels, I think, but I think it was City of the Dead, maybe, and it had
Land of the Dead.
Maybe Land of the Dead, where it was like Dennis Hopper.
Yes.
Yeah,
Land of the Dead.
And that one, I only saw it once, and I just didn't like it. It just, I don't know. It just seemed like all they were concerned about was the violence, the gore, and the effects, and everything else was secondary. And it just didn't really. I didn't really care for it. This, even though there are certainly plot holes, there's not a lot of character development, there's not a lot of exposition, I don't know. I guess it's just preference. That's all it is.
Sure.
I just like this style better.
Well, Romero always seems to be making some kind of social statement with every movie that he does. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it beats you over the head a little bit, especially later on. This movie makes no social statement. No. It's just pure popcorn, and that is fun.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I mean, it feels like a drive-in movie. You texted me with this suggestion, and I was glad, because last week when we watched Exposition, I'm not saying it's some kind of intellectual masterpiece or anything, but it kind of stuck with me and was bothering me for a while, and I wanted something light, something that wasn't going to keep me up thinking about issues and psychological trauma. And I'm glad. I'm really glad that you picked this one, because it was fun. It's just a fun movie.
I'm glad this delivered for you.
Me too.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend. Like our page on Facebook, share that as well. Leave us a comment on our website. We're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.